Let us begin. So previous class we were seeing about the Windows instances, right? How to how to log into the Windows machine and how to manage the storage, right? So today we will see with respect to the Linux instances. So quickly, so before we proceed to the Linux machines, we were I think we also spoke about the snapshots in the previous class, right? Snapshots and the AMIs, right? So what can you do with those things? Here is just a quick high level summary of the volumes and the snapshots, right? So when you have a volume, what can you do? You can take a snapshot of it, right? So I'm just showing you the different possibilities that are there, right? One second. Yeah, okay. So you have a EBS volume, you can take a snapshot, right? So when you have a snapshot which is unencrypted, you can copy that snapshot. Or when you have a snapshot, you can create a volume from it. Or from a snapshot, you can also create an AMI if it is the root volume, right? You can also copy the snapshot across the regions if it is a I mean, if you have an encrypted snapshot, again you can also copy it, right? You can create a encrypted volume, you can change the encryption key if you want. So these are just the different possibilities, right? If you have a volume, you can take snapshot. If you have a snapshot, you can copy the snapshot, you can create a volume, you can create an AMI, same thing, right? So if you have an AMI, you can copy that AMI, right? Or you can launch an instance, right? So these are the different possibilities that you have with your snapshots and your the volumes, right? So we saw all these steps, right? So creating a snapshot, copying the snapshot, all those things, right? So all this applies to either Windows or Linux, it does not matter, it is the same. Okay, so now we will quickly go start off with the Linux instances, right? The Linux instances. So here also the process is same. You have an AMI, right? So what is the AMI? So it is the image from which you launch your EC2 instances. It has the OS plus maybe other software and tools. So for Linux also the same steps. You choose an AMI, you launch a EC2 instance, you do its basic configuration, right? And then we are going to see how to log into the Linux instance and how to manage the EBS a little bit on the Linux instances. Okay, so we'll go ahead. We will launch a Linux instance. So you can choose whatever flavor of the Linux you are comfortable with. I'm going to go with Amazon Linux. Okay, the steps are more or less the same. Maybe internally the storage mounting commands might slightly differ, but yeah. So this Amazon Linux is similar to RHEL and this CentOS. Okay. So I'm going to launch a T3 micro instance, right? All other settings remain the same, right? We are not changing anything, same like your Windows instances. Right here also we have a security group. So for the Linux instances, we are going to connect via SSH, right? So we need to open the SSH port, that is the default port is 22. Like for Windows, you are opening the RDP port. For Linux, here we are opening the SSH port. Again, you can open from any source you want. Usually, you want to keep it restricted to your environment, to your office IP address, something. Don't open these ports to anywhere. Usually, it's not a good practice. Okay, and then I'm going to say review and launch. So here also for the Linux machine, you need the key pair, right? We saw in the previous class what is a key pair, right? So we will use one of the key pairs which we have. Okay, we can choose one of the key pairs which we have, and I'm going to say I have access to the key, and then launch instance. Right. So same thing. What is the information you need to log into the instances? You need the instance's IP address. You need the username. You need the password. Right. So we have the IP address now. We can get it from the console. Right. We are going to use the public IP because we are coming from outside the VPC. If you are connecting from one instance to another instance inside the same VPC, then you can use the private IP. Or if you are doing VPC peering or whatever, right? If it is within the same VPC or you are using VPC peering, right? Then you can use the private IPs to connect to them. But remember, like we saw in the VPC class, your security groups have to allow the ports, even if they are in the same VPC or different VPC. Your security groups have to allow the ports. And then what is the username? What is the password? Right? For Windows, we saw the default username is administrator. Right? If it is not administrator, you contact the AMI provider. They will give you the information about what is the username. For Windows, the default username is going to be administrator, and we saw how to decrypt the password. So for the Linux, what is the username? It depends upon the flavor of Linux. For Amazon Linux, it is EC2 hyphen user. So if you want to know what are the default usernames, right, you have that information over here. AWS EC2 Linux instances default usernames. Right, so here are the list of the default usernames. If these don't work, you check with the AMI provider. Suppose you are using Amazon Linux, the username is going to be EC2 user. For CentOS, this is the username. For Debian admin, for Fedora, EC2 user or Fedora, right? For SUSE Linux and so on and so forth. For Ubuntu, it is Ubuntu. In case you are using Ubuntu, you have the default username. If these don't work, then you check with the AMI provider. These are the list of default usernames and passwords depending upon the flavor of Linux that you are using. Okay, so we are using Amazon Linux, so the default username is going to be EC2-user, and then you have all the other information. So whatever I'm showing you, everything is there in the user guide. Okay, it is nothing that I have invented or I have discovered, right? It is all what is there, right? Whatever I'm going to show you will be here also, right? How to connect to your instance, right? We have the information about the instance, right? We have the IP address, right? We have the username, we have the key, all that stuff, right? So let us go to our instance, right? So we have the IP address over here, right? So how do you SSH into the Linux machines, right? I think you guys already must have been using it in your environment, right? You are going to use some SSH client, right? You need a SSH client to connect to the EC2 instance. Suppose you are coming from a Windows machine, right? What do people usually use? They use PuTTY, right? Or nowadays, I think with Windows 10, you already have the SSH client built in the PowerShell, terminal, right? You don't want to use PuTTY, but a lot of people still use PuTTY, right? You can use the Windows 10 SSH PowerShell. So, or if you are using a Mac or a Linux machine, you already have the SSH client installed. You can straight away SSH from your terminal, right? You don't need to install an additional SSH client. Okay, so we'll see both the steps, right? So first we will see how we are going to connect from a Windows machine to the Linux EC2 instance. So you need to download PuTTY, right? So are you guys aware of this, or do you want me to show you how to download and all that stuff? Right?
No, it's okay.
Yeah. So I recommend you download PuTTY. You download this thing called PuTTY Gen and PuTTY Agent, right? Please download these three tools. They will be useful. All are available on the PuTTY website for free, right? Or this is called Pagent, right? It is the agent, and you have PuTTY Gen. So PuTTY is the SSH client which we actually use to establish the connection. PuTTY Gen is for your key management, right? And PuTTY Agent is a SSH key forwarding agent. We'll see where we are going to use this. Okay, so first we will go with PuTTY, right? Straight away how to connect, right? So you open PuTTY, right? You enter the IP address, right? So we'll open PuTTY, right? So what is the IP address? We copy the IP address, right? And then you need to specify the key. So here you don't have a password, right? You have the IP address, right? Then you have the username. We know it is EC2-user, and the password, instead of the password you have the key, right? What is the key? We use the private key, that is the key which you get, right? The public key is stored by AWS. Okay. So we use the private key. The private key is like your password, you need to keep it safe. If you lose the private key, you cannot recreate the same private key. Okay, you can't recover the same key, you can only create a new key and provide access again, right? So that is important to remember. You can't recreate the same key, or you can't again download the key. Okay, so we have the key, so we have to specify the key. So the key is in the PEM format. You see in the previous class I showed you, right? The key which we download is going to be in the PEM format. So let me open that and show you, right? We will have our key like this, right? So whatever key we used for this instance, right, we use this key called demo September 14. So let us take a look at that, right? Somewhere it will be there, right? So here you have the key demo September 14. Okay. Okay, what you will have is this, right? The PEM file, right? This is the key you get from AWS. So if you are using putty, right? So this is only for putty. If you are using putty, you need to convert this PEM to PPK. It is just you are converting the format of the key, because in putty you can't use PEM, right? So you need to convert this PEM to PPK. How do you do that? So you need to convert it only if you are using putty. If you are using the Linux terminal, or you're using the Mac terminal or the PowerShell terminal, you don't need to do this conversion, right? So how do you convert PEM to PPK? You open the putty gen tool, right? The key generator tool, and then you say load. Don't say generate. This is used to create a new key pair, right? To generate a public private key pair. So we don't want that. We want to convert an existing private key into the PPK format. It is still private, but you're just changing the format, right? Like think of it like you're converting a Word document into PDF, right? The content is the same, just the format is different, so that it can be used with putty. So you say load, and then you specify your, make sure you choose all files over here, and then make sure you choose your uh, key, that is the PEM key, right? That is demo September 17 PEM key, and say open, right? And then all you need to do is save private key. Don't click on save public key. We don't want the public key. Click on save private key. Okay. So once you click on save private key, it is converting the file to PPK. If you want, you can provide a password. Otherwise, you can proceed without it, right? And then make sure you save it with the extension .ppk. You can give any name, but it is recommended that you use the same name as the PEM file. Otherwise, you will get confused, right? It does not matter if the key name is same, because the key is just the signature inside the file. So you can save it with a different name also, but it is recommended whatever file you are converting from PEM to PPK, just use the same name with different extension, right? And you save the file, right? If you lose the PPK, you can again, what do you say, do the conversion from PEM. But if you lose, you don't have both, means you are gone. Okay, so what AWS gives you is the PEM file. So you convert it to PPK using the putty keygen, and then what you do on your instance, in putty, you give uh, the IP address, and then the key you provide over here. You go to SSH, and then you go to auth, and then you provide the key over here, right? And you provide the key over here, right? You choose the PPK file and you say open. So you specify the key over here and the connection information over here. If you want, you can specify the username here itself, right? You can say EC2 hyphen user at the IP address, or while logging in, you can specify the username. So we have specified the IP and the key, and then you say open. If it is not working, then probably you have not opened the security group. If you don't get this prompt, that means there is some problem with the IP address or the security group configuration, right? So you're accepting the key, and then here you can give the username. Okay, so the key which we used now is for this particular user. Okay, if you have another user, let us say you may not be able to use the same key. So currently the key which we have is for EC2 user. Okay, and you see we are able to log in. So the key which you get by default, right? When you're creating the instance, you say use the key. So that key is for this user. It is not for all users, right? You can create additional users. We will see how to do that. But on the key which you specify while launching the instance is the key for the EC2 user or whatever the default username is. It is for the default username. So think of this combination as the username and password, right? And whatever is the IP that you have, right? So like this, you log into the Linux machine. Now, once you log in, inside it is like any other, what do you say, the Linux machine, right? So whether it's RHEL or Ubuntu or Amazon Linux, so the inside the commands and all that will be the same. There is no difference in that. Okay. So we'll come back to how to connect from a Linux machine to another Linux machine after we see the storage part, right? After we talk about the storage, we'll come back to connecting between, suppose you have a Linux or a Mac machine, right? All that stuff we will see. Okay. Okay. So now let us go back to storage on Linux, right? So are you guys, have you guys worked with storage on Linux, right? Like how to do the mount or how to create a partition, those type of things.
So this one, no.
Oh. So because I'm not going to go into detail about storage management, right? So just the basic stuff that you need to know, because inside that is going to be Linux administration, right? So in the exam you will not get all this. So this is just for practical use, right? So the exam part of EBS we have already finished. That is what are the volume types, which volume to use for what type, right? So now what we are seeing is for the ops side or practical use little bit, because in case you want to attach a volume and all that stuff, right? So how to do it in
Okay.
Linux, right? So in Windows, how you did it, right? In the first step, what you did, you opened the My Computer and you went to the Manage and you went to the Disk Management, right? So the same steps we are going to do, but in Linux, right? So here you went and you were able to see what are the disks which you have, right? And we were able to create the partition and the file system and all that stuff, right? So same thing over here. So now, how do you check uh, the volumes which are attached to this machine, right? So while creating this machine, we added only one EBS volume. So let us open volumes and key, right? If you remember, while creating this Linux instance, we have specified just one EBS volume, right? We have specified one EBS volume, which is the root volume, obviously, right? We have this volume, 8 GB volume, right? So you can see this in the AWS side, but inside the OS, how do you see, right? On Linux, you can use this command like lsblk, list block devices, or you can also say fdisk -l. So it is going to show you the volumes which are attached to this, right? It is going to show you the volumes which are attached to this. So again, you will see different names here for the disk, right? Because I'm using a T3 micro, you will see the disk name like this, right? NVMe 0N1. If you are using a T2 or a previous generation instance, right, you will usually see it like /dev/xvdf, the device name, right? The disk name, you will see it like that, right? So here you see you have a 8 GB disk with a partition which is mounted on root. Same thing in fdisk also, it is showing you have a disk which is 8 GB in size, right? And it has the Linux file system on it. So this is, you're just checking what are the disks attached. So how do you check what is the free space and what is the, like opening the My Computer, you use something like df-th, right? So it will show you what is the partition, how much space is actually being used, where it is mounted, right? Here you have the disk, and then you have its partition, right? So you can have one partition, two partitions, that is up to you, right? The entire disk you can use as a single mount point if you want to, right? All that is inside the OS, right? So how do you check whether what you say, there is any data on this or something like this? Because I told you the EBS volumes from outside you cannot say anything, right? By looking at it from the AWS console, you will not be able to say whether this volume is empty or how much space is occupied, what is the file system, all that you will not be able to say from the AWS console. It is, think of this as you are looking at a physical hard drive in your hand, right? Like I said, if I give you a physical hard drive, you will only be able to say what is its total capacity by looking at the sticker or something. You cannot say what is there inside the disk or what partition is there, what file system. You have to go inside the OS and check it, right? Same thing over here, right? So we'll go ahead, we'll create a new volume, right? Steps are the same as Windows, right? Let us say we are creating a 2 GB volume. Make sure it is in the same availability zone as your instance, otherwise you will not be able to connect to it, right? I'm going to use US East 1F, right? Create volume. So we have created a 2 GB volume. Okay, so now if I attach this, so what is there in this 2 GB volume, we don't know. Right now we actually know because we created an empty volume, it will be empty, but don't assume like that, I told you, right? So just because here it says available, it does not mean it is empty. Available means it is not connected to any machine, right? Available means it's not connected to any instance. It does not mean it is free or empty. Okay, so how do you attach this? You go and you say attach volume and you specify the instance. Don't change the device name, right? You say attach volume, right? So now here when I go and again now I do lsblk, you will see another disk being attached. You have our 2 GB disk attached now, sorry, the last one, right? It is not there, now it is attached. But if I do df minus th, like opening my computer, it will not show you that, right? It will not show you this NVMe1N1 because we have just attached the disk. We have not what do you say, we have not formatted it or we have not mounted it anywhere. So currently there is a 2 GB disk attached to this machine. So how do you make this disk available for use? Right, in Windows you go and format it or whatever, but I told you always you check whether this disk has any data on it, whether it has any file system on it, right? So how do you check it? Right, you run the command called file -s followed by the device name NVMe1N1, right? So what is this command going to do? It is going to check whether this disk has any file system, right? It's going to check whether this device, this disk has any file system on it. So if you get an output like this that says data, that is the device name colon data, it means it does not have any file system on it. It is like empty. It does not have a file system. So now you can go and format this disk, right? Without checking this, don't proceed and what do you say, create a file system, right? So only if you get an output like this, you need to create a file system on it. So think of it as it does not have any partition on it, right? So you can go and say like mkfs, whatever file system you want of type, say ext4 or xfs or something, right? And the device name, right? Right. So you are saying create a file system on this. Okay. So it has created. So it has, you think of it as it has formatted this disk with ext4 what do you say, file system, right? Now again let me just put lsblk, right? You see the disk, it is still there. If I say df minus th, it will still not show up because we have not mounted it anywhere. So again, if I run the same command like sudo file -s, right, for this right, you will get an output like this. So if you get an output like this, right, it means that this device, this disk has some file system on it, right? So you should not format it. Okay, so this disk now has a file system, or it might have some data. You should not format it. Okay, so why I'm saying this is, now say for example I remove that volume from the instance. Okay, so now it is attached to the instance, so let me remove it from the instance, right? So how do you remove it? First you make it offline in the OS by running this unmount command, right? Not command is umount, not unmount, right? So you are unmounting this file. Anyway, we have not yet mounted it also, so no need to unmount now, right? So I'll show you why. So if you want to remove this volume from the instance, you choose this and you say you detach. Same like Windows. What happens when you detach? You are just removing it from the instance. It will be available outside, it will show available. Now in the instance, if I check, it will not be connected to the what do you say, to this server anymore. It is not there here, right? It is not there, right? So again, if I connect, now let us say we have an existing volume. Somebody asks you to attach this volume to the instance. So you go to actions and you say attach volume. You choose the instance and you attach it. Right now it is attached to the instance. Now you go inside the instance and you say lsplk. You see the volume. Now immediately you should not go and say mkfs -t ext4. If you do this, what happened? You are formatting the disk. We don't know what is there in the disk. So always first, after you attach a volume, you run this command file -s whatever. Right? So you run this command. If you get something like this, it means this device already has some file system or some data on it. Don't run mkfs. So you can straight away go and you mount this, what do you say? You mount this disk and you check, right? So only if it is says file system : data, it means that it is empty, it is unallocated. You can go ahead create a file system. If you get output like this, it means it has data, because if you format, your data is gone, you can't recover it. So you have to be careful. So you can mount this wherever you want, right? So you can create a directory, whatever, right? Data or whatever, right? And then you can say mount. You can put our disk, right? You can mount this wherever you want. Right now, if I go to, oh, now if I do, you can see that we have mounted our disk on /data. It is 2 GB in size, 6 MB has been used. Right. So now if I go to data, right, it will be empty. So I can create some file. Okay. So I have created some file on that. Right. So we have attached the volume to the machine. We have formatted it ext4. We have mounted it somewhere. So now if you want to remove this disk, please don't go straight away here and say detach. It will work most of the time, but sometimes it might get stuck. Always first try to unmount it or make it offline in the OS. Right? Always try to first make it offline in the OS. Like in Windows, you go to the disk management and you say make offline, right? So same thing here, you do it right. You unmount in the OS so that it does not show up in my computer, but it is still attached to the machine. Then you go and you detach it from here. Go to actions and you say detach. Right, remember your volume can usually be attached only to one instance at a time. Now they have added a new feature called EBS multi-attach, but it has a lot of limitations, and that is for a different use case. Right, even though practically it is possible, right? I have not seen anybody use it or even how to use it, because it does not support any of your common file systems like ext4, ext3, xfs, ntfs, all that it does not support. That is some special use case, right? That is some special use case, but usually your EBS volumes can be attached only to one instance at a time. It's just like your physical hard drive. At the same time, you can't connect it to two machines, right? If you want to connect it to another machine, you remove it from this machine, then attach it to another machine. How do you do this? Same thing. You detach the volume, and then now if you want to attach this to another instance, you choose this, go to actions, attach volume. You choose the other instance, and you follow the same steps, right? You attach the volume to the other instance, right? You log into that instance, right? And then the first thing what you need to do is you check whether it has been attached. LSPLK. Okay, we have attached this 2 GB disk now. Then you check this disk whether it has any file system on it, right? Straight away, don't go try to mount or do the MKFS. First check whether this disk has any file system or any such thing, right? So how do you do that? You run this command sudo file has the disk name. So you get an output like this. It means this volume already has some file system, so we will not format it. So you can create your mount point, and you can mount this volume over there, and then you can check. We already have the mount point data, so I will go straight away and I will mount this disk on that mount point or another mount point. That is up to you, right? After you mount, you can go and check, right? You see we still have the same data, right? So the data in the EBS volume is persistent. It is like your physical hard drive. You don't need a server, right? The hard disk can exist independent of the server, right? So you can remove the volume, you can attach it to another machine, right? Or if you don't want this server anymore, you can terminate this instance and you can keep the EBS volumes. Say you have some data on the volumes, you can terminate your instance, keep the volumes, you can attach them to another instance, right? The snapshots, all that remain the same. Just like Windows, you want to take a snapshot, you choose the volume, say create snapshot, it is incremental. We saw it in the previous class. All those are the same. There is no difference, because snapshot you are not taking from inside the OS. It is all done from here, right? If you want to take a snapshot of this, say create snapshot, you can save the snapshot, right? So when you are creating a snapshot of an unencrypted volume, right, the snapshot will also not be encrypted, obviously. Suppose you want to encrypt this, you can encrypt this only while copying the snapshot, which is what I showed you in the beginning, right? Right, so you say you're taking a snapshot of this volume, right, a 2 GB volume. I'm saying create snapshot, right? So I will just say some demo, creating a snapshot of the volume, right? So if you go to snapshots, you will see that snapshot over here. Okay. So from this snapshot, you can create a volume. Again, you can attach, right? So we saw, right, from this snapshot, if you create a volume, what will happen? It will have the same data. It will have the same data. So let's just wait. Okay. So what are the other operations which we saw, right? Now we have this storage, right? So let us say you want to increase this the disk size. It is currently 2 GB. Say you're running out of space, you want to increase it, right? So how do you do it? I told you there are two ways. One is you can do the modify volume, which is the quick and the dirty way to do it, right? You want to modify the volume, right? You can choose the volume and you can say modify while it is connected to the instance, and you can do the modification. You can increase the capacity, you can change the volume type, right? And you apply the changes, and it is going to take a few minutes up to a few hours for these changes to take effect. It is not instant. Okay, so we saw that it is going to be in the modifying state, and then it will go to the optimizing state, but you can use the volume meanwhile, but you might not get the full performance. So if you want to get the full performance or the correct way to modify, the recommended way to modify your volume is to take your volume, create a snapshot, right? So you have a snapshot now. From this snapshot, you again say create volume. So you get another volume. While creating the volume, you can specify a bigger capacity like 6 GB. So here it is 2 GB. So the snapshot will also show 2 GB. So the volume which you are creating from this snapshot has to be minimum 2 GB, or if you want, you can increase to 6 GB, right? And then you attach this volume to the instance, right? So this is the proper way to modify a volume. So what we do like this is the quick way to do it, and this feature is called elastic volumes. I think in the previous class we saw. So this feature, right, how you modify the volume on the fly, is called elastic volumes. It is a quick way to do it, but it is not the recommended way, because your performance takes a hit until the optimizing is complete, right? And we saw the limitations, right? You can do the modification only once every 6 hours. You can't do frequently, right? The correct way or the recommended way is to take a snapshot of the volume, and then from there you create a new volume with a bigger size, attach it to the instance, and then if you want, you can remove the old volume, right? So we will see how to do it with the Linux instance, right? So we have this snapshot, right? So from this snapshot, you can say create volume, right? You can encrypt it now, right? Snapshot taken from an unencrypted EBS volume will be unencrypted, but from an unencrypted snapshot, you can create a encrypted volume, which is what I showed you this morning, right? The diagram, right? Right? So here is what this diagram is showing, the different possibilities, right? So what we did now, we had a snapshot, right? We had a volume. From a volume, we took a snapshot, right? It is unencrypted volume, right? So the snapshot is unencrypted, right? So the unencrypted snapshot you can copy, right? All these things you can, sorry, you're creating a volume, but if you want, you can copy this volume, sorry, copy this snapshot to another region, right? Or you can copy to the same region. Why you would want to copy to the same region? To encrypt it, because currently this snapshot is unencrypted. If you want to encrypt an unencrypted snapshot, you need to do copy and choose the same region and say encrypt, or you can also copy it to another region if you want to, right? So if you want to encrypt an unencrypted snapshot, the process is to do a copy and then choose encryption and choose the key, whatever the encryption key you want, right? That's what we are talking about over here, right? So if you have an unencrypted snapshot, you can copy it, right? So while copying, if you want, you can encrypt it. If you don't want, you can copy it as it is, or from an unencrypted snapshot, you can create a volume, which if you want, you can again encrypt it. That is what we are going to do now, right? So we have a snapshot, we want a volume, right? So we can create a volume. So I'm going to say actions, create volume, right? So here I can increase the size, right? I can make it like 6 GB, right? And I can make sure you're choosing the same availability zone, otherwise you will not be able to attach it to your instance, right? If you want, you can encrypt it by providing the encryption key, otherwise by default it will not be encrypted because the snapshot is unencrypted, right? And then you say create volume, right? So now we have created a new volume from this snapshot. So if we come back to volumes, you will see a 6 GB volume size. Okay, so this is the proper way to increase your, to modify your volume, whether you want to increase the size or change the volume type. So this is the correct way. And then what you do, you go and you attach this volume. You say attach volume, you specify the instance, and then you say attach, right? And then what you do, you go inside the OS, you check whether it has been attached, right? You see now you have a 6 GB disk which is attached. So again, you should not go and say mkfs file systemd. Always first thing is you run the command and check whether it has any data on it, right? Run sudo file -s followed by the disk name, right? So when you do this, you get an output like this. So it means that this has some file system. So we should not format it, right? You can go and you mount this. You create another mount point, right? Slash data one or something like that, right? And then you say mount, right, to data one. Now if you go to DFTH, you will see this mounted, right, to NVMe 2 N1, but it is showing the capacity as 2 GB only, but it is a 6 GB volume, right? It is a 6 GB disk, but it is only showing you 2 GB because the snapshot was only 2 GB. The additional space which you added will be unallocated, right? The additional space which you use will be unallocated. So how do you extend the volume, right? We'll see how to do that now, right? So you have a volume which is 6 GB is the physical size, right? But your system is only able to see 2 GB of it, right? Sorry, the second one, right? The system is only showing 2 GB, but the disk management is showing 6 GB. Okay, so we'll see how to extend that, but we'll quickly see the other way of extending the volume. Instead of taking a snapshot and doing it, what is the other way of doing it? Now let us take the same disk NVMe 1N1, it is 2 GB, so let us increase it. We have this 2 GB disk. So now let us say I want to increase its volume size. So I can go here directly, instead of creating snapshots, I can say modify volume. Right here I can increase it. Now say from 2 I'm going to make it 8, or let us make it just 4. Okay, 4, 8, whatever you can increase, you can change the volume type and you can say modify. Right, so here it will say it will take some time for the performance changes to take full effect. But when you create it via snapshot, you get the full performance. You don't have to wait for anything, right? Same thing, we increase the size now, but now you have to wait for some time for the full performance changes to take effect. But you can use the volume. Meanwhile, you can use the volume. And then of course you need to extend the file system. Right, how do you extend the file system? The instructions are given here. For Windows I showed you, right? You go into the disk management and you say, what do you say, like extend volume, so that you can use up the free space, because we have added some empty space, right? By default your system will not extend it, right? So you can either extend this C into the empty space, or that empty space you can create a separate partition. Same thing here in Linux, right? So you say yes. So here if you see, the status here will be in use modifying, then in use optimizing, right? So it will be, so while it is in the optimizing state, you can use the disk, it is available, right? But the full performance you may not get, right? The full performance you may not get. So now we are extending the NVMe 1 disk from 2 to 4 GB, right? From 2 to 4 GB. Now if I say ls blk, it will show it as 4 GB, right? NVMe 1 is 4 GB, NVMe 2 is 6 GB, but the OS is still seeing only 2 GB. That is your DFTH here, right? It is still seeing only 2 GB, but the actual disk is 4 and 6. So you need to extend the volume, right? So how can you extend? So you have to go inside the OS, and after you modify the volume, you extend the file system, right? So you can use grow part or resize to FS, right, to extend the file system. If you are using ext4, you can use this, right? If you are using XFS or something, you can use grow part or something like that, right? So it depends on what, right? If you are having a partition, right? All this thing is storage management, right? So we have the ext4 file system. So you are going to use this command resize to FS to extend our, what do you say, our existing partition, our existing file system, right? So you say sudo resize to FS and the disk name, right? So dev NVMe 1 N1, right? So what is NVMe 1? It is actually 4 GB, but your OS is seeing only 2 GB. So now when I do this, right, and I check again, You will see that now. Earlier it was 2 GB, right? In DFDH, now it is showing you the entire 4 GB, which is mounted on slash data. Same thing for data 1. It is actually a 6 GB volume, but you are seeing only 2 GB in the OS. So same thing, you go and you resize this so that it can use the entire empty, the remaining empty space also. Right now, if you see, NVMe2 is also the usable space is now 6 GB. So it does not matter whether you modify the volume on the fly or from a snapshot. You have to go inside the OS and either extend the volume or create new partition, all that, right? Storage management, right? So all that is given over here. So now whatever I showed you and the basic storage management is shown over here, right? How to extend the volume, right? How to modify the volume, all those things, right? So these are some of the things that you would probably do from time to time, right? So attaching a volume, increasing the volume size, modifying the volume, right? Removing a volume from one machine, attaching it to another machine, all those things. Okay. And you have another thing called EBS optimization. Okay, so we'll come back to this, not EBS optimization. I'm looking at EBS initialization. Okay, we'll talk about EBS optimization also. Right. So for some instance types, you will see this EBS optimized option. Okay, but nowadays all instances are EBS optimized by default. Okay, nowadays all most of the instance types are EBS optimized by default, right? So here you see all the current generation instances will be EBS optimized by default. So what is this EBS optimized is? So EBS, I told you, it is technically attached over the network. For us it appears like a local disk, but actually it is coming over the SAN network or whatever, right? It is not a local drive. Okay, it appears like a local drive for your machines, but it is actually over the network. So the performance of the EBS volume, right, the bandwidth, I told you how you measure the performance and all that stuff, right, the initial class, right? So if you want to get good bandwidth, that is, you want some dedicated bandwidth to EBS so that your IO and your throughput is good, then you need to choose an instance which is EBS optimized. So while launching an instance, if you see, right, suppose I choose say any AMI, does not matter the AMI, depends upon the instance type, right? So so here you see there is a column called EBS optimized, right? It says, if it says dash means it can't be EBS optimized, right? It indicates whether the instance type supports EBS optimization, right? So an EBS optimized instance, it has a dedicated throughput for EBS IO. So think of it, it has a separate path or a dedicated throughput for the EBS throughput, right? Some dedicated bandwidth for EBS so that your IO performance is good, right? It depends upon the instance type. So here you see for some things it says yes. So if I choose some instance type, say for example I'm choosing something like let us go to all generations so that maybe you can see the difference. So if I choose T2 micro and I go to the next step, right, here you will not see anything called EBS optimization, right? Here you will see an option called EBS optimized. It is not there. So for the T2 instances, right, it is not EBS optimized. Okay, that is, your EBS IO will be slow. So if I go to something else like say M4 large, let us take for example. Okay, here it says EBS optimized, yes. So here if I go, right, if I scroll down, here you will see EBS optimized is grayed out. That is, it is EBS optimized by default. You don't need to do anything, right? So earlier for old instance types, you needed to enable this if you wanted EBS optimization, and it used to cost a little more money. But these days, most of the instances are EBS optimized by default. That is, you can't change this attribute. It is already EBS optimized by default. The current generation, 90% of the instances are EBS optimized by default. Right? For some reason, if you are using some old generation like M3 or C3, those type of thing, then maybe you need to check. So, for example, if I'm using M3 large, let us see. Right here, you see EBS optimization is not available for M3. Right? It is a previous generation. But if I go to something like let us see something which has yes. Let us see m3.xl. Right? It purely depends upon the instance type. Right? If I go to m3xl, here you see the EBS optimized instance, but it is not enabled by default. That is, it is possible to enable EBS optimization, but additional charges apply. So nobody really uses old instance types these days. In case you are using, it is recommended to launch it as EBS optimized so that you get better EBS, you get some dedicated bandwidth for the EBS traffic, right? Some additional charges apply. If it is the option is grayed out, it means it is EBS optimized by default. You don't pay anything extra. It is already there. If you don't see this option, then you can't optimize it for EBS. So if you see a hyphen over here, dash means you can't EBS optimize it. If you see an S, it means either it is enabled by default or you can enable it. That you have to check while launching the machine. So most of the instance types are EBS optimized by default, except mostly the older generation instances. Right, so usually the old generation, when we used to use, right, if it was a production machine or something, we used to enable EBS optimization so that we get the dedicated throughput and the performances good. Okay, so that is called EBS optimized instance. It is just a feature where you get some dedicated throughput for your instance. So this is EBS optimized instances, right? You don't have to remember, just know that for older instance types it was an option, but 99% of the current instances are already EBS optimized. Okay, so that is the EBS optimized instances. The next is EBS initialization, or you can say pre-warming, right? Or initialization. Earlier it used to be called pre-warming. Okay, right? So some people still use the term pre-warming, but now technically AWS calls it initializing. So what is initializing EBS volumes, right? So whenever you create a EBS volume, right? So in the past, what used to happen is, right? Past means I'm talking about more than 3 years ago, right? So whenever you create an EBS volume, we know it has some performance, right? It has some IOPS and throughput, right? So how much IOPS it has, it depends upon the volume you are creating, right? If you create a GP2, we saw it provides 3 times the capacity, or 100 IOPS, whichever is minimum, all that stuff. Now let us say you created a 200 GB volume. So how much IOPS you will get? You will get 200 into 3. You will get something like 600 IOPS, which can burst up to 3000 IOPS, something like this you will see, right? So you are supposed to get this. So earlier what happened, whenever you created a volume, right, you never got this performance immediately, right? The moment you create the volume, you don't get 600 IOPS usually in the past. What you had to do is you had to do something called pre-warming, or it is now called initialization, right? So what AWS used to recommend is, whenever you create a volume, right, your IOPS might take up to 50% hit. You might get up to 50% lower IOPS until you either read all blocks of data, or you write to all blocks of data. That is, until you access all the blocks once. Access means either read or write. What happens on a disk? right? When you're accessing a disk, what are you doing? You're either going to read some data or to write some data. So until you either read all blocks of data or write to all blocks of data, you might get your EBS volume might take up to 50% performance hit. So if you want to avoid this hit, then you can manually do the pre-warming. That is, you can manually either read all blocks of data or write all blocks of data. What is doing the writing all blocks of data is like doing a format, like a full format. That is, it writes zeros to all blocks of data. So if it was a new volume, right, your volume can come from two types, right? You can create a volume in the console, like saying create volume. When you say create volume over here, what happens? You get an empty volume, right? It's like going and buying a new hard drive, right? When you create a volume like this. But when you create a volume from a snapshot, what happens? Right? You choose a snapshot and you say create volume. You're creating a volume, but this volume has some data on it already, right? These are the two ways in which your volume can come into existence. It is either a new volume or a volume which is coming from an existing snapshot. So a volume which is coming from an existing snapshot will have some data on it. So you cannot, if it is a new volume, okay, you can do a write. That is, you're writing all blocks of data. You're doing a full format. You get your performance. But if your volume is coming from a snapshot, it already has some data. So you can't write all blocks of data. If you write, it will format the disk. So what is recommended is to read all blocks of data, right? So you go around, you read all blocks of data. So we have a tool to do that. If you want to write, you can do a full format. If you want to read or write, you have a tool to do that. But now what AWS says is new volumes already get the full performance. You don't need to do anything. Earlier you had to do it whether it was new or existing, right? Now new volumes, they get the full performance. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to do the pre-warming, or now it is called initialization. But if you are creating a volume from a snapshot, then if you don't want this hit, you can do the pre-warm. If you don't mind this hit, you can leave it, but eventually it will attain its 100% performance. How it will attain? Because as you use the disk, you are going to keep accessing the blocks randomly. So after a day or two, it will be, what you say, pre-warmed automatically. It's like starting your car on a cold day, right? You can start it, you can let it idle for some time so that it warms up, or you can take it around and you can drive it. Slowly it will warm up. Same thing here, right? If you don't want to take the initial hit, you need to pre-warm it. If it is okay for you, over a couple of days, it will automatically get, what you say, pre-warmed or initialized. So how do you do this pre-warming? So now, because you need to pre-warm, you not need to, if you want to, you can pre-warm volumes created from snapshots. You do it by reading all blocks of data. Don't do the write. If you do a write to all blocks of data, you are formatting the disk. Okay, so you need to read all blocks of data. How can you do it? You have a tool called TD or FIO. It is available on both Windows and Linux, right? You check the disk which you want to pre-warm, if you want to pre-warm, and then you have this tool called TD. It is same on Windows also, right? You can download this tool, right? Or it is usually installed, right? So be careful, you might destroy your volume, right? So you just need to read, don't do write. So here is what they are showing you, that it is going to read all blocks of data. So you run this command sudo dd, input file is the volume which you want to the volume which you want to initialize. Output file is dev null, block size is 1 MB. Same thing is, if you want, you can use the FIO tool or the DD tool. Both tools, they do the same thing. This is the command, right? Same thing on Windows also.
So this is the thing which we used to do, our day-to-day task. These are the things.
Yeah. So you might have to do this. Like I said, for some people, it is okay. They just create the volume, they start using it, because in a couple of days, it will automatically pre-warm. But the recommended practice is, especially if you are putting in a production server or something where you need good IOPS immediately, you don't want to take a performance hit, then you need to it is not compulsory, right? So it is recommended, right? Earlier you needed to pre-warm whether it was a new volume or from snapshot. You needed means if you wanted the full performance immediately. Otherwise, you can just use the volume. Eventually, it will get its full performance, right? So now new volumes, they get their maximum performance the moment they are created. You don't need to do any initialize. But if you are creating a volume from a snapshot, right? Because what is actually happening is, I told you, snapshot are stored in S3, right, in the background. So whenever you are creating a volume, right, that snapshot is pulled down from S3 and put on the EBS volume. So this is recommended so that you don't take a performance hit. Okay. Okay. So we'll take a break, guys, now, and you let me know when do you want to continue.
Yeah, now we can connect as usual, like after 15 minutes.
Okay, we'll connect after 15 minutes. Then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So any questions? Let me know.
Yep.
So this is about the usual the Linux. How do you attach volumes? How do you modify volumes? Those type of things. Okay. So now let us go to the next step, right? So how to connect to the Linux instances we saw. So now let me create another Linux machine. So let me go and launch another instance, and we will see how to connect from one Linux machine to another Linux machine, because my laptop is Windows, right? To show you how to connect from one Linux machine to another Linux machine, I'm going to create two machines in AWS itself, because normally what you do, you connect to one machine, from there you connect to other machines, right? In general, in real time. So similar thing. Or say you're using a Mac or a Linux laptop, the process is the same. In this case, I'm just putting both the Linux machines on AWS. Right, I will put it in different availability zone simply just for the sake of it. Okay, right. And then the usual stuff, right? So security group, right? And remember, when you want to connect from one machine to another machine, right, their security groups have to be open. This we already saw in the VPC. So simply to make our work easier, I'm just opening SSH2 everywhere, right, and launch. So say for this machine I'm using a different key, right? Say for the previous machine I used September 14. For this machine I can use the same key or different key. That is up to you, right? So say I'm going to use a different key called August 8 for this machine. We are launching the instance, right? I'll call this my second machine, right? I'll call this my first machine. Okay. So now let us say, for example, now we'll assume both these machines are on AWS, or you can think one of it as your laptop also, right? It is the same thing, right? You're going to open the terminal, right? So we are connected on machine 1. Now we want to connect to machine 2, right? So how can I connect to machine 2? Again, same thing, I can open putty, right? I can open putty, I can put the IP address, I can put the its respective key over here, and I can connect, right? It will connect. You have the key on your laptop, you convert it to PPK, you put it and you connect it, right? So it is going to connect. Okay, so you have the key on you, it is going to connect, right? Or maybe I'll connect and itself show you, right? You're going to copy this, you're going to open this, you're going to go and specify the key. What is the key we used? I think we used this key, August 8th, I think. Yeah, we use this key, right? You use this key and you say open, you are able to connect to the machine, right? Same step, right? I connected to the second machine, right? Now let us say you are connecting from your laptop. You connected to the first machine, so we are on the first machine. Now from here you want to connect to the second machine, to another Linux instance, right? So what is the second Linux instance? You have this IP, so you can use the public IP or the private IP, right? Because both these machines are inside AWS in the same VPC, I will use the private IP, right? So how do you connect, right? You want to know the steps, the command is given here. You can click connect, you get the command, right? So basically you need the key, right? You need the key, right? So you are going to say something like SSH minus I, right? The key name, right? Dot PEM. You don't need to convert to PPK. When you are connecting from one Linux machine to another Linux machine, you can straight away use the PEM file and you can give the username at the IP address, something like this, right? SSH minus I, the key name, followed by the username at the IP address. So this is the format. So you need to have this key, right? So on this machine, I don't have the key, right? On 130, I don't have the key, right? On 130, I don't have the key. So if I use this command, for example, now, let us say SSH minus I, whatever is the key name, followed by EC2 user at the DNS name or IP address. Now let us say if I copy this, right, and I put this over here, right? Let us see. Right, what are you getting? Right, we don't have the key, right? The connection is not established, right? We are still on 130 because we don't have this key. So now what I can do, I can copy this key into this machine. So if this is your own laptop, you probably have the key downloaded in some path. If it is another EC2 instance, maybe you want to copy the key, right? So maybe you want to copy the key. Key is what? It is just the signature, right? So you can just create a file like this, or you can use SCP or some tool to, what do you say, to copy the key, right? Or I can just create an empty file, open this file on my machine, right? I have this, where is the demo? So August 8th, right? So here I can go, I can take the PEM file, I can just open it in some text editor, right? I can just copy this key, right? The key is just the signature, right? So you can copy this, paste it here, save this file. So we have the key now, right? Then you can try to connect, but still you will get another error, right? We have this key now on our machine, so I'm saying use that key to establish a connection, right? Now you get a different error, that is bad permissions, right? So if you have a key on your machine, especially if it is a Mac or a Linux, right, you need to change the permissions of the key, right? By default, if you see the user group and everybody has the read-write access, so you want to remove these permissions. That step is also given here, right? You need to change the permissions to 400, right? Otherwise you will not be able to connect. Once you change the permissions, sorry, right, only this particular user has the read access, right? That is, you have excess permissions, so it will not let you connect. So once you change the permission and you copy your key, then you will be able to connect, right? So this is the step if you want to connect from one Linux machine to another Linux machine, right? You have the key, you change the permission to connect. Same thing whether you're using Linux or Mac, if your laptop is one of them. But if you are using PuTTY, so now I used PuTTY and connected. I just showed you, we assumed that our first instance is your laptop, the second instance is the EC2 instance, right? But if you are using PuTTY, right, so you have a better way of doing it, right? So now I used PuTTY and I also copied the file on this machine, right? On the first machine, I have a copy of this key. So like this, say if you are going to connect to many machines real time, right? So say in your environment, what are they saying is first you connect to the machine 1 and then from here you connect to the other servers, right? You connect to machines 2, 3 and 4. So you are coming from somewhere, right? You connect to the machine 1 and then you connect to 2, 3 and 4. So what you do from here, you connect, you provide the key for the machine 1 on your machine, and then you have the key for the second machine, third machine and fourth machine stored over here, right? So it is not a good practice to keep storing your keys everywhere. So you can keep your keys over here, right? You can keep your 1, 2, 3, 4. You can keep, I mean, if there are 4 different keys, you can keep it here, and from here itself you can pass the credentials. You can pass the key, right? So how you do that? You use the putty agent. That is why I told you, download the putty agent and open it. It runs in the background. Okay, you can add your keys over here. So whatever servers you need to connect to, their respective keys you can add over here. So now I can add the August 8th key, right? So you add whatever keys you want. Does not have to be in any order. Right here you see I have some 4 keys added. Out of that, one of it is that August 8th key, right? So you just close this, it runs in the background, right, as an agent, right? You load your keys over here. So now what I can do is, so let me close this putty. See, let me close this, right? So how do I connect? I open putty. Let us say I want to connect to server 1, right? So I can go here, I can copy its public IP and I can put it over here, right? And then what I need to go to SSH auth and specify. So you don't need to specify the key over here now. What you need to do is enable this option called agent forwarding. It is not enabled by default, I think. Enable this option called agent forwarding. When you do this, it will automatically pick up the key from the agent. You don't need to explicitly specify the key over here. Just load all your keys into the agent and enable agent forwarding, and you just put the IP address, right, and it will connect, right? You see I didn't explicitly specify the key, but this key is loaded in the putty agent. This demo September 14 is loaded in putty agent, which is why it is connecting. Okay, which is why I'm able to connect. Sorry, it is probably the key is not loaded, right, which is why I'm getting the error, right? So let me add that key. I can say add key. Let me go and add that key, right? Make sure you add the PPK, not PEM, because we are using putty, right? Now if I go and say again restart connection, right, it will ask you the username. So when you provide the username, it looks for the corresponding key, right? If that key is there, it will authenticate, right? And you see I didn't explicitly specify the key in putty. I just added the key in the putty agent, and then I was able to connect. So from this machine, on this machine, you see now I can remove this key. I don't want this. I don't want to save my keys on all machines because other people may be able to access it. It is not a good practice. Okay? So let me remove this key on this local machine. So you see I don't have this key, right? But now if I try to SSH to the other machine, the normal command which you would use is something like this: SSH minus I, the key name followed by EC2 user at the machine's IP address. So now I'm not going to do all that, right? I'm just going to say SSH EC2 hyphen user at that other machine's IP. You can use private or public depending on where you're coming from, right? Now you see I'm able to SSH. Why am I able to SSH? Because it picks up, putty can pick up the key from the background, even though you're going from one AWS machine to another AWS machine. Because you're using putty in the background, it picks up the appropriate key from the agent. So you don't have to go around saving your keys on all machines. You can keep your keys on your laptop. From there you can connect, right? You can keep your laptops in a, especially this is useful for people using Windows, because you are going to use putty, and instead of specifying the keys every time or storing your keys on different machines, you can store it on your laptop, right? You can add put putty agent, you load your keys, and you can connect from one machine to another machine. It will pick up the keys automatically, right? So this is another thing which people commonly use. Okay, right? So let me know if you have any questions. Okay.
Very good.
Okay? So this is how you connect from one machine to another. Suppose, like I said, you have a Mac or a Linux, then you probably want to use this command. So you probably have the key on your machine. So then you will use this command, right? You will use this command. So this is assuming you're on your laptop. The command remains the same. That is, you're using a Linux or a Mac. The key is there locally. So that is not a problem, right? So this is one thing. Okay. So the next thing is how to manage the user account. Right now, let us say you want to create what do you say, uh, additional users. Then how are you going to do? Right, you want to create a additional username. Then how are you going to do? Right, in Windows you can go to my computer, you can add a local user, all that stuff. In Linux, how do you do it? Suppose you're not using Active Directory or something, right? In Windows, you can go to local users, you can create a user, give him a password, ask him to connect. Right, so here we are using keys. Right, so how do you do it with keys? Suppose you want to give somebody a access to this machine. You don't want to give them the EC2 user, right? Because it is like the admin user. So you want to usually give people their own credentials. So how can you do that, right? So at present we have only the EC2 user. That is, we have only one username plus his key. So now let us say you want to create another user. So you want to create a user called Tom, and you want to give him his own key. You don't want to share the same keys, or ideally, right, you want to give the people their own username and password. So let us say you are creating a key called tom.pem or something like that. So how do you do this? Right, first of all, maybe you can create the key. How can you create the key? You go to here, you go to keys, key pairs, and you say create key pair. Right, it will download the private key. Right, all these are free. Right, you can say create key pair, you can give the key pair a name and say create, it will download the key. Right, it will download it in the PEM format. Right, it will download in the PEM format. You can convert to PPK format and give it to the user. Right, so we have the key now for Tom. So how do you create the user and how do you give him that authentication? Right, so that is what we are going to see. Right, so first you log into the machine as EC2 user, and then you add a user. Right, you go sudo add user. So these commands might be slightly different from Linux flavor to Linux flavor, but it is the standard way how you create the new user. Right, so you give the username, right, Tom. Sorry, you create a user called Tom, right, and then what you do, you go in as that user now. Right, you switch user as Tom. Right, and what you need to do here is, right, how is this key authentication actually working? So let me come out of Tom for a second. So if I look over here, right, in this directory, that is the home directory for this EC2 user, you will see a hidden folder called .ssh. This is for the EC2 user. How is that key authentication working is, you will see a folder called .ssh which is hidden. So if I go into that, you will see a file called authorized keys. Right, so if I open authorized keys, right, you will see the key over here. So what is this? So this is the key that we used for this instance. Okay, so just give me a minute guys, I'll be back. Sorry.
Vijay, you are there? Hello.
சொல்லுங்க.
விஜய், இதான் நம்ம இதுக்கு பண்றது, நம்ம ஃபைல் செட்டப் பண்ணுவோம்ல, இப்படி தானே பண்ணுவோம் நம்ம ஆத்தரைஸ்ட்.
ஆமா ஆமா.
ஓகே ஓகே. ஆனா என்ன ஒரு AWS பண்றாரு, நம்ம வந்து அதுல இதுல பண்ணல, ரைட்டா?
ஆமா, நம்ம என்ன
Yeah, sorry guys, I had some office call. Okay, so what have we done? We have created a user, we have created a key for Tom, right? So what is actually happening, right? So if you look at, for example, the existing user, right, there is a folder called .ssh and a file called authorized keys, right? Inside that you have the key. What is this key? So this is the key which we use to launch this instance, that is September 14. So what is AWS actually doing when you say use this key while launching the instances? It is storing the public key in this path, right? The private key is given to you. The public key AWS stores in this path, that is in SSH authorized keys file. So when you are providing your key, it matches your private key with this public key. This is what is happening in the background. Okay, so what you see here is the public key for September 14 key, right? So we call it a key pair. Key pair is what? Combination of public and private key. So how do you get the public key, right? So you can open puttygen, you can load your private key, right? Now if I load the private key, right, demo September 14, right, uh, let us open the PEM, right? So remember, PPK is used only for putty. So if I open this, right, what you see on top here is the public key. If you see, it will be the same thing which is pasted over here, right? The public key is stored by AWS on your instance in this path. The private key you have. If you want to see what is the private key, you open it like this, right? So when you load the private key in your keygen, right, you can see the public key over here. If you want to see the public key, the private key itself, then you open it like in TextPad or whatever, right? You can open it like this in text editor or whatever. You see the key, right? The public key is different from the the private key is different from the public key, right? So private key is like your password. You should not give this to anybody. Okay. So with the private key, you will be able to find the public key, right, by opening it in keygen. So what basically AWS is doing when you launch your instance and you specify the key is that private part of the key it is storing on the instance. So same thing you need to do for the user Tom, right? Same thing you need to do for the user Tom. So we have added a user. So now I log in as I switch user as Tom, right? Now if I go to the Tom's home directory and see, you will not see the SSH folder. So you need to create that structure basically, right? You can say something like mkdir.ssh. So we are just creating that same structure, right? And here you have two steps. So basically uh, uh, for this SSH directory, you need to change the permission to 700. Otherwise, it will not work. Otherwise, the user will not be able to log in, right? Even though you create the folder, you create the file, you add the key, user will not be able to log in if you don't have these exact permissions, right? So on the SSH folder, you need to change the permissions to 700, right? Okay, so that only the user has the permissions, right? Then you can go into SSH, or you can, what do you say? You create that authorized keys file, right? You don't have that file, right? So you say touch authorized underscore keys, right? So you created this file, it is empty. You need to change the permission on this file also to 600. The folder is .ssh is 700. This file is 600. Otherwise, the user will not be able to log in, right? Now, what you need to do? You open this file using your VI editor or whatever editor, and you paste the private key. How do you paste the private key? You open Pgen, you load your private key, right? You load your private key in the PEM format, right? So what is the key? You are using the key called Tom, right? So I have my tom.pem. So I am loading my private key in Puttigen and I am copying the public part. Don't open tom in what do you say? Don't open the key itself in your text editor and open. There you are copying the private. We want the public part of the key, which is what is mentioned here, public key, for pasting it into authorized keys file. So you can use this type of authentication outside AWS also, right? Your own servers. You don't want to give passwords, you can use keys, right? So copy the public key and paste it into the authorized keys file. Paste it into the authorized keys file. Now come out, right? Now you can give the user Tom the login details, right? You can say here is the IP address of the server, here is your username and your key. You can convert the key to PPK and give him, or if he knows how to convert it, he can convert the key, right? So now if I want to log in as Tom, again I copy the IP address. I can provide the key over here, or I can add my key to my putty agent, right? I can add my key over here, right? And I can say open. And now I have to give the user Tom, right? So how is the authentication working? It is checking, it is picking up the key from the agent, right? And it is comparing with the key which I have stored in that SSH folder, right? So like this you can create keys. So suppose if Tom he forgets the key, he loses the key. If you have a copy of the key, you can again give him the key, or if you also don't have the key, you can't recover the key. Then what you have to do, again you go in as EC2 user, you switch user as Tom, you go into Tom's what you say, that SSH folder, right? You go to authorized keys and you can remove the file or you can remove the key and add the new key, right? You get the idea, right? If Tom he forgets the keys, you remove this authorized keys file, or you go into the authorized keys file, you remove the existing key, you create a new key and you add its private part. Okay, you add the private key again. So this is how the basic how you create additional users and manage the users. Okay, so your company or they might use single sign-on, Active Directory, those type of things. That is beyond the scope of this course. Okay, so if you want to manage local users, this is how you do it. Okay, so guys, please give me another few minutes. I have a small office call that I have to make a couple of calls, right? So I'll connect back at 10:15. Okay.
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 Right. So we have another way to log into these machines, which a lot of people are adopting these days, because right with keys again you have another problem of managing a lot of keys, right? So there are multiple ways that people do it, right? So the traditional way is using these keys, right? So with a lot of keys, what happens? It becomes difficult to manage the keys. The users might misplace those keys. They might save those keys somewhere, right? So again, it is not the best of the ways to do it, right? So another way to do it is AWS provides something called this sessions manager, right? It is there under the AWS SSM tool, right? The systems manager, right? AWS systems manager. Inside that, if you go, you have a tool called the sessions manager. So let me open that, right? In the console, right? If you go to SSM, right? The systems manager, right? You can manage other things also, right? Maybe we'll see a couple of those things going forward. But the first thing that we are going to see is you scroll down over here, you will have the session manager, right? Basically, we need to see these two things. The other things are beyond the scope of this course, but yeah, you should know what is the session manager. So you can create a SSH connection from here itself using your AWS credentials, right? Here, what are we using? Here we are using the OS level credentials, right? Where is this user Tom or where is this user EC2, right? It is a OS level user, right? Inside this machine, we have created this user called EC2 user, right? And we are giving the keys. So you don't want to do like this, right? So you have this thing called the session manager where you can what do you say, SSH, right, into the terminal on your Windows or the Linux instances, right? I'll show you how to do this because it involves some permissions. Again, permissions, we have a separate class. We'll see how to do that, okay, in the permissions class, but just follow along for now, okay? So you can connect, you can say start session, you will see your instance over here and you can start a session, right? So how do you make sure the instances appear here, right? So you see I have two instances but they are not showing up here, right, under the sessions manager. Why? Because I haven't enabled that for my instances, right? So basically what you need to do is on your instance you need to add a permission, right? Under instance setting you have something called a IAM role, right? So we'll be talking about IAM in a separate class, in the security class, right? So basically for this instance I'm giving it permission to use the SSM. Think of it like that, right? So that is what I'm giving this instance, not user. For this instance I'm giving it some permission, that is I'm letting it be controlled by this service. That is what I'm doing. Now I say apply, right? So once you add that, right, you don't need to reboot your machine, right? You will see it over here. Sorry, you will see it over here, right? I mean, it will take a few minutes for it to pop up over here, right? So once you give the required IAM role, right, it will take a few minutes for it to pop up over here. Then you can choose the instance and you can say start session, right? Why is this useful? Is because, right, you can log the activity. You can log the activity in the session manager. What commands people are running? You can go to preferences and you can log it, right? You can say the output, right? The other things we'll not go into now, right? You can store the session output in S3 bucket, or you can push it to CloudWatch logs, like how we saw for the VPC flow logs, right? So these logs you can publish to either CloudWatch or you can publish to S3 bucket, so that you can audit what people are doing, when people logged in, what commands they ran, all those things. If you want to track, you can use this SSM systems manager, the session manager. Because if you go through PuTTY, it might be difficult to keep track of who is doing what, right? To track those type of things and also to manage the keys, right? So here you have this additional feature also where you can store the session output in a bucket for future logging or auditing purposes. You can do that. So this you can't do if you are using a standalone client like PuTTY or SSHing into the machines, right? So then it might become a difficult task to track those things in case you want to track it, right? So here if I go to the sessions, so let us just, I don't have anything, just going to take a few minutes for it to pop up, right? Or sometimes when you reboot your instance, it is usually faster, right? But usually reboot is not required. Right? It's going to take a few minutes. We can't do anything. We just wait, right? So another advantage of this is you don't need to open security groups, right? If you are using the SSM, you don't need to open your SSH port, right? So let me close the SSH port now for this machine, right? We have opened, right? We have opened SSH, right, inbound. So let me remove this, right? Now for this machine, inbound traffic I'm not allowing. Right, let us see whether it has popped up here. Let me quickly reboot this once. Might take longer. So here you see here I have lost connection. So yeah, we'll wait for this to pop up. Meanwhile, so I want to talk about another tool called Vault. Have you heard of this term called Vault? Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So you're working in the
Yes, sir.
banking thing. So some people use Vault also. So there is a product from HashiCorp called Vault, right? So there might be other, what do you say, services which do something similar, right? Basically to handle your secrets, that is your keys, passwords, SSL, all those things, authentication, right? So if you want, if you're interested, you can learn about this tool, right? It is from a third-party company called HashiCorp. So do you use this tool, HashiCorp Vault, or from some other service or vendor?
We are using from different one, not the Ashikop, I think.
Okay, because I'm just giving you some third-party tools which are commonly used these days, right? So there are other tools also, like you said, right? So you can use this to manage your secret. Secret means your password, keys, all those things, certificates, right? Otherwise, like I said, if you have keys, right, they will be uh, stored here and there. Passwords people will save here and there. So on the fly, you can get credentials. Whether you want to communicate between two layers in your application, like application to database or application to application, service to service, right? Logging into machines, right? So you can use this as a, what do you say, intermediate to manage your secrets without giving the explicit credentials, right? So this Vault itself is a separate tool. There is a separate certification exam for this also. If you're interested, you can go through this, or if you're using another secrets manager, you can use that also. Okay, so that is up to you. I'm just giving you the tools. This is not for exam, just for practical use, I'm saying. Right? A lot of people are adopting these things these days. 3 or 4 years ago, people were still using the keys, right? Manually using the keys, but now slowly the method of operation or right accessing, right? They are making it more secure by using these additional tools. Right, so here you see I have my instance which is showing up, my first instance, because only for the first instance I added the role, right? So my first instance can now be managed, that is I can connect to it using the sessions manager. So you can use the session manager via the browser itself, or you can also use it from the AWS CLI, right? You can connect to it from the AWS CLI, right? So let me just show you. Right, CLI we have not seen, right? So when we see the CLI, we will show you this, right? Right, so without using putty, right, you can use the AWS CLI, right, with SSM, right? You can say start session, right? Let me just go to the example, right? You can say AWS SSM start session hyphen target your instance ID. So you are actually starting a session through SSM from the CLI. CLI means it is simply your command prompt or your terminal. It is not your putty. So from here I can say AWS SSM, right? I can say start session, target, and the IP. But you need to have configured your CLI, right? So CLI when we will see when we talk about CLI. But SSM you can use either straight away from the browser. You can choose your instance and you can say start session, right? So it will open like your terminal over here. And as what user? As this user, as your AWS user. It is not a local user on the server. So now you are logged in as this user, right? So normally you use the root account, but I told you practically people don't use the root account for everyday administration. They give you your own username. So I have a username called demo. So I am logged into this machine via my AWS credentials, not any OS level credentials. Then here you can do your uh, usual stuff, right? You can go in as root or whatever. You can check it is the same server. You see, I'm able to connect to this machine even though I have not opened SSH, right? My security group port I have not opened because this is not using SSH, it is using the SSM agent, right? So for this to work, your instance needs to have the SSM agent installed on it. It is not like it will work for any machine, right? In order to use this thing, you need to have the SSM agent installed on your machine. It is usually installed on the AMIs provided by Amazon. If you're using any other AMI, it is not working. Make sure you install the SSM agent, right, on the instance. Only if you have the SSM agent will you be able to manage that instance via SSM. You can manage it via SSM from your browser or from your AWS CLI also. You can open a separate terminal if you don't want to use it through the browser, right? You don't need to open the security groups for this, right? So here now let us say I terminate this session, I exit, right? The session has been terminated. Now if I go back to SSM, right, I go to the history, you can see the history, right? You can store these in CloudWatch logs or in S3 bucket. Here it is just showing you when I started my session, when I ended my session, and who is the user. User is demo in this AWS account. We'll see what is this ARN and all the stuff. Basically, this particular user accessed this instance from this time, and what happened to the output, we didn't log it, right? So you can go to preferences and you can enable the logging. So for example, let me say I want to push it to CloudWatch logs, right? You can choose a log group name. I think I might already have a log group name. Okay, or we can create a log group. And just say SSM logs. We don't have it. Okay, what I'll do, I will use the VPC logs. What is that? Right, you just need a log group to publish these logs. Okay, so we will push it to that log group. Okay. Now if I go to the sessions and start session, I choose my instance. I say start session, and let me also open CloudWatch. Let us say add some file. I'm going to remove some file. Right, then I'm closing my session. Right. So here if I go to my log groups, right, I think we are pushing it over here. Right, so here you see there is a log stream created for this thing that we created. Right, again it might take some time for it to push the events. Okay, we switch to the original interface. Right, here is the demo. I think this is the one. Yeah, 410. Yeah, it should be the, right. So here you see the events. Right, so whatever the user did, right, some sort of a log you have, or you can push these logs to S3 bucket also, and if you want to store them for a longer period of time, you can store those logs for auditing purposes or those type of things. There is no additional cost for this as such. It is available as a service. Okay. So you can use this SSM also. It is for both Windows and Linux. You want a terminal session, you can do it from here. Right? And then I want you to explore this thing called the run command. What is this run command? These are probably the two things that you need to know from the architect point of view. The other things are, what do you say, further inventory management and all those kind of stuff, right? But the sessions manager and the run command, you need to have some idea, right? So I want you to go through the run command and let me know what is this going to be used for, or how is it going to be used for. Okay. Right?
Yeah, sure.
So this is some of the stuff. Yeah. So yeah, we have some more time. So let us quickly talk about EFS. Okay. So what is EFS? So okay, 1 minute. Let me just open my PC side. These things will keep it aside. Right. So let me go and start my instance again. Okay. Yeah. Our instances are started. Right. So let me quickly go and add my SSH role again. Right. So we have logged into this thing, right? Let us say lsblk and df-th. Okay. So we have our storage and all that stuff, right, on this instance. Okay. So now we saw EBS volumes. So what are EBS volumes? They are like your local storage, right? They are like your local disk for your server, right? So now you have a service called EFS, right? You have EFS and then you have something called FSX, right? So first we will talk about EFS, right? So EFS is elastic file system, right? It is elastic file system based on the NFS file system. It is like a network share, right? Even though EBS is attached over the network, we don't manage it like a network attached storage. It is managed like a local disk, right? And it can be attached only to one machine at a particular time. Whereas EFS, you can mount it to multiple machines at the same time. That is, parallelly, multiple machines can access the same storage. So it is a separate service. It is also a storage service, but it is called EFS. It is based on the NFS protocol, right? So you have multiple EC2 instances, right? Hundreds of EC2 instances. You can attach the same EFS volume to your, you should not say volume, you call it a file system, right? You can attach it to your multiple instances at the same time, right? Suppose you have a web server or content serving or something, right? You can store your content in a common place like EFS, right? If multiple machines need access to the same content, you can share it, right? You can say, okay, I will have two EC2 instances. I will attach EBS volume, right? And I will map it as a network drive. You can do that also. But if this machine is down, the storage also will not be accessible, right? Like how you do on Windows, right? You map the network drive, right? Right, as your X drive or Z drive or whatever, which is connected to another machine, you can map it. But if the other server is down, the storage will be down, obviously, right? So, but physically, the EBS is attached only to one instance at a time, right? But here with EFS, right, it is also storage. We call it a file system, but Basically, it is based on EBS and it is storage, right? So it is a file system which you create in EFS and you attach it or you mount it on multiple instances. They can access the same files parallelly, right? Hundreds of machines can access this, and EFS is supported only for the Linux instances. It is not supported for Windows, right? At present, it is not supported for Windows because of this NFS protocol and compatibility issues problem, right? It is not supported on Windows. It is supported only on the Linux machines. Okay. So what is the capacity on and all that? EFS, it does not have what you say. You don't need to provision capacity. Like EBS, you don't need to say I want 80 GB. It starts off with 6 KB. That is, think of it as it starts from 0. It will accept as much data as you put on it. Okay, it is going to scale automatically. You don't have to provision any capacity in advance. You pay only for what? Something like S3, right? Something like S3, but to access EFS, you have to mount it. You cannot straight away, what you say, like S3, you can't go in the browser and do those type of things. Okay, so we will see how to attach the EFS, how to create a EFS, right? So you say, so you do it in the same region usually, right? And you say create file system. Okay, and you have certain options over here. We will see some of the common options, right? You can give it a name for your file system, right? I will just say demo EFS, demo EFS, right? And make sure you are creating it in the appropriate VPC, right? You can connect it from on-premise also, right? You can access your EFS from on-premise also, right? All that comes under advanced networking, but it is possible, right? You can access, because it is a network file system. You can connect to this EFS from another VPC from your on-premise also, provided you have a VPN connection or a direct connect, right? If you have extended your AWS, right, environment into on-premise, like I said, using a VPN or a direct connect, then your EFS may be accessed from on-premise also, because it is based on the standard NFS protocol. Okay, but it is not like from anywhere you can connect to it. You have to be somehow connected to this VPC, either through VPC peering or through a VPN connection or a direct connect. Okay, so you can click on customize, right? So again, few people, they change those options, right? But we will see what are those options, right? So now they have this option called automatic backups. Earlier it was not there, right? A year or so ago, automated backups was not there, I think a year or a year and a half ago, right? So it backs up your file system using AWS backup service, which is again a separate service, right? If you want, you can enable that. I'm not going to enable that now, right? And then they have a storage class over here for EFS also. Again, a relatively new addition, right? Earlier, all these were not there. Earlier, you just created a EFS, had just the performance mode and the throughput mode, and you mounted it. Now they have added more features like to save money, right? Your infrequently accessed files will be moved to the infrequent storage class like S3, right? Automatically, it will, what do you say, move your objects to infrequent storage class, and you can specify after how many days, right? If your files have not been accessed for this many number of days, automatically move it to infrequent storage class. So these are those things, right? If you don't want, you can keep it as none, right? And then you have the performance mode. For most of them, the general purpose and the bursting is good enough, right? In rare cases, they might want to go for max IO, right? When you go to max IO, the latency might increase, right? It is simply the performance mode. You just have two options that you can switch, right? For the latency sensitive workloads, for most of them, the general purpose is good enough, right? If you are doing large, what do you say, large operations, big files, then you probably want to go for max IO, right? That is just two options you can choose. If you are more interested, you can go through this. Same thing for throughput mode, right? So you can choose bursting or you can choose provision. Provision is going to be more expensive. That is, what is the throughput that you want, you can specify, right? So again, if it is a critical high usage volume, right, then you can use provisioned and you can specify how much throughput you want, or you can stick to bursting, right? It is going to scale automatically based on the file system size. How it is going to scale, all that is in depth. If you want, you can go through this, right? Okay, because I'm not going through each and everything, because we will never finish the class if we go through them, right? Just the basic idea. If you are using this service, you can go ahead, click and read more, right? Because in the exam they are not going to ask you so in depth, and even practically, like I said, if you are going to use the service, please read more about the service, because the documentation will keep on going, right? It will never finish, right? So here is what they told you, right? If it is burst, how much it can burst, right? What is the throughput you are going to get, those type of things, similar to your EBS, right? Depends upon the capacity, the throughput is going to burst. And same thing, if you want to encrypt your EFS, you can encrypt. If you don't want, don't encrypt, right? And then you can add your tags and you can say next. So here is the important thing that you should know, right? How it is attached, right? So whenever you are creating an EFS, you create something called the mount targets. The mount targets are the network interfaces. So let me open the network interfaces in a new tab over here, right? So I told you when we were talking about the VPC and all that stuff, right? So your security group or the IP address, all that is what it is attached actually to the interface. Even though we say it is the instances IP or the security group, technically your IP address and the security groups are all there on the instance. Are there on the interface. The VPC flow logs, it collects the logs for what? It collects your flow logs for the interfaces, right? When we saw the VPC flow log, right? It collects the logs for the interface, not for the machine. This interface is what is attached to the machine. So indirectly you are getting that machine's logs, right? So you have the network interfaces. So here we have 3 interfaces. So let me remove this one. I created this for some other purpose. Let me remove this. Okay, so we have 2 interfaces because we have 2 instances. Each has 1 interface, right? 172.5577, right? 152.172.5577, right? It is attached to these 2 machines. Okay. So now we will come to EFS. So how is EFS going to be attached? It is over the network. So when you are creating an EFS, you have something called the mount target. The mount target is actually the network interface, right? The mount target is the network interface through which the EFS is going to be attached to your machine. So think of it as EFS, and it has some network interfaces, and then you have your instances, right? So you have your EC2 instance. These instances can be in different availability zones, right? They can be in A, B, C, right? Different subnets, right? Indirectly, they can be in different subnets indirectly, right? So you want to have a mount target for each availability zone. So if you want to attach, so say for example in US East 1 we have 6 availability zones. So it is recommended you create 6 mount targets. That is 1 per availability zone, like A, B, C, D, E, F. So if you want to attach this EFS to this EC2 instance, then it uses this mount target to attach. This is what happens in the background, right? Suppose you don't have a mount target for B and C. You created only mount target for A, E, and D. Then you won't be able to attach your machine in B to EFS because there is no mount target. So think of the mount target as the network. Not think, it is the network interface, right? It is a network interface which is going to be created. So what is a network interface, right? So it will have a IP and a security group. It will have a IP and a security group. It will pick up an IP from your subnet range. So you should have sufficient IPs, right? So when you create an EFS, you need to have one or more mount targets depending on where you want to, where your instance are, to what instance you want to attach them. So each mount target will have an IP and a security group. So by default, these mount targets, they use the default security group, which comes with your VPC, right? Whenever you create a VPC, there will be a default security group which you cannot remove, right? Because it is used for certain things by default, right? So these mount targets will use the default security group and they will get an IP. Each mount target will get an IP from that subnet range. So we'll go ahead, we will create that, right? So by default, it is going to have one mount target per availability zone. If you don't want, you can remove it. All this, they don't cost money, right? And it has a security group. IP address, it picks up automatically, or you can specify an IP, right? It picks up an IP from the private range, right? And it has the security group. So all of them use the default security. And then you say next and you create. So don't worry about these permissions for now. We'll come back to the permissions later, right? We'll just leave it blank and we'll say create. So now it is creating your EFS, right? So again, all these new, they will keep adding features, right? So if you are using a particular service, make sure you are you go through the new features and all that stuff, right? Right. So here you say it is still being created, right? So even though it says available, if I click on this console again, okay, no problem. The mount targets will be being what do you say? If you go to the network, you will see the mount targets are being created. They are still creating. So if you go here to the network interfaces, you will see 6 interfaces being added, right? These two we created, 16 and 17 we created, right? The last two, these are for our instances. These 6 are now being created for the EFS, right? For each availability zone, you have one, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, right? So each have their own IP from that subnet range, and they are all attached to the default security group. Okay, so this is what is being created when you create a EFS, your storage plus its mount targets, right? The mount targets will take a couple of minutes. Until then, you will not be able to attach it, because when you attach it, you do it from here, right? Okay, so we'll wait for that to be created. So meanwhile, what I will open is, we'll just open the documentation, right? So you probably want to keep an eye on basically the limitations, those type of things, right? What is EFS? All this we saw, right? How to do whatever I'm showing you will be here, right? What I'm looking for is troubleshooting. So for practical use, you can go through this troubleshooting general stuff. But what I'm looking for is the yeah. So what I want you to go through is this part, right? Mounting EFS file system. I'll show you how to do it, but when you're practicing, this is what you need to go through, right? Mounting file system. Remember, it is not supported on Windows. Okay. Let us just go to limitations. I think should be that. This is also is there. Okay. Anyway, I'll check and I'll give you that. Right. Okay. So now we are going to see how to mount the EFS. You can keep this open while you are practicing. Right. I'll try to do without that. Okay. So let's just see if the mount targets are created. Okay, they are created. Okay. So now how do you attach this to your instances? Right? How do you mount it? So very simple. You have the command over here. You can say attach. Right? So they give you a DNS name. Right? They give you this DNS name, or you can use. There are two ways. One, you can use the EFS mount helper, or you can use the NFS client. Either way you can do. Both the steps are given over here. Mounting the EFS with the mount helper or without the mount helper. Right? You can mount it either ways. The command is given right in the console. Right? So usually people mount it via the DNS. What is the DNS? Right? You can use the file system ID, or you say IP, it will give you the IP. Right? But the IP is going to be different for different availability zone. What is this IP? This is the IP for that mount target. So here if I open EFS, that is that. Yeah. So if I go to the network interfaces, here if you see, if I go to B, right, what is its IP address? 91.65. That is what is showing here, 91.65. So if you want to attach this EBS volume to an instance in 1B, then you use this IP. But again, people are not going to use IPs, they use the DNS name. So irrespective of the availability zone in which you are using, this DNS name remains the same. Right? So ideally try to avoid using the IP to mount it. Right? This IP is nothing but the IP of the mount target in that availability zone. Right? You change the availability zone, the IP will change. So if you want to mount it to A, use this IP. But we are not going to use IP. It's not a good practice. Right? We use the DNS name which is provided. So you copy this command. Right? So basically what is this going to do? This is going to mount this as a NFS file system on this path. Right? The path you can create whatever you want. Right? The mount point you can create whatever you want. You can say mkdir EFS or something. That is up to you. Right? You can say what do you say? You can use whatever file system. Sorry, what is that one? I keep forgetting. You can use whatever the mount point that you want. Right? I can say mkdir EFS. Right? So now how do I mount? I copy this command. Right? You have the guide also over here. Same thing. The document which I opened, that is what is going to open. Right? But the command is given for you. You just take the command and you put it over here. Right? And let us see what is happening. So here is where you will run into problems. Right? It will not mount. Right? It will not mount. Why is it not mounting? Right? It will get stuck like this for some time. Right? Because it is using the NFS, it is over the network. Right? You have to make sure the security groups are allowing that. Right? The security group should allow that traffic. You have to open the NFS port on your instance. Right? Now on my instance, what am I doing? Right? So you need to allow the security groups. If your security group is not allowing the NFS port, then it will not work. So let us open the security group. Right? So here you see only inbound SSH is allowed. Right? So here you need to allow inbound NFS. Right? You can allow inbound NFS here. Right? You can allow inbound NFS 2049 from that from the entire the VPC, because your EFS is in the VPC. Right? You can put the VPC CIDR over here. Or what you can do is, instead of adding the rule like this, you can simply attach the default security group for your instance. Your instance already has one security group, right? If you go to the networking and say change security group, it is already using some security group, your instance, right? Where is this? Right? So you can attach another security group. So currently we are using this security group. Now I can attach another security group. That is, I want to attach the default security group. That is the same security group which my EFS is using. Right? So what is my EFS using? Which security group? This is the default security group. What is its ID? Right? So it is using the security group A59. So let me add that same security group to this instance. Right? So I'm adding the default security group also to this instance. So what is happening here is, if you look at the default security group rule, what is it allowing? It is referencing itself. We saw in the beginning in VPC, right? You can reference another security group in the source. So now what will happen? It will allow traffic coming from this source itself. So now when you attach this default security group to the instance, it will communicate with other instances or EFS which have the same security group. Because here in this security group, the inbound rule is allowing all traffic something like from itself. That is, if another machine also has the security group, then these two will be able to talk to each other. So either you can open the NFS port for your VPC, or you can just add the default security group to your instance as an additional security group, right? So here you see now my machine has two security groups. So in this security group we are managing the other connections. The other security group we are just using for for our EFS. Now if we go and try, let us see whether it is going to mount, right? Right, now you see after adding the security group it mounted. Okay, it's busy or already mounted because I added the rule, it mounted, right? Otherwise it was stuck for some time, right? So now if you go and check, you will see that your NFS is mounted on your mount point, right? Same step on your other machine also, right? Right, so here if I go, right, where is EFS? Yeah, I go, I copy this, I do this, sorry, I connected to the same machine, sorry, I connected to the same machine. That is my second machine. Right, so on the second machine also, so let me create a mount point, right, something like data or something, and I can take this, paste it, and just change your mount point. Now you see it is not mounting. Why is it not mounting? It is just stuck over here because for this machine it is not accepting NFS traffic. So go ahead, add the same. So which is why I say usually don't modify the default security group, just let it be there as it is. It references itself usually, right? So it is useful for certain things, right? So just leave the default security group with the default rules, don't modify them. Okay. So now I have added that. Now you see it has mounted. After I added the rule, it returned back to the prompt. Now if I go and check the same volume over here, it is mounted at this mount point, right? It is mounted at my home directory data. Here it is mounted at EFS. The mount point can be different, but it is the same. Same volume, right? Is the same volume which we are accessing. right? So here I need to go into CD data. So here if I say touch some file, right? If I come back here and check, you will see the, sorry, it didn't touch, permission denied, right? So here if you come, you will see the same thing. So like this you can mount it to as many machines as you want and parallelly have shared data, right? So if you unmount it over here, you unmount it the same way, right? You unmount it the same way just like how you do it, but this is actually attached over uh, the network, right? This is attached over the network, okay? So you can try this EFS, you can try to mount it. So again, EFS it is there in the free tier, right? I think you get 15 GB or something in the EFS free tier. Again, some people they use this, but you have to know. I mean, if you want shared uh, storage, right? Uh, and you can use EFS, right? I think EFS you get 5 GB or 15 GB. I'm not sure, but it is sufficient for practicing. Yeah, 5 GB of EFS you get free. This is more than enough. Okay? Just shared file storage for EC2 instance. Okay. If you don't want this, you delete it. Right? You delete it. Right? It will take a few minutes and it will be removed. That is, it will remove the mount targets and all that stuff it will remove. Okay? So let me know if you have any questions.
No, Seth.
I don't have this question.
Okay. So we'll catch up next week then. So you can practice these things in Linux and Windows and storage. Okay. So
Sure, sir.
next class
Sure,
mostly
sure. And
we'll complete off the remaining a little bit of EC2 stuff is there, and then we'll go to the database.
okay, and any chance you got to collect this exam questions?
Yeah, man, I have got some. Just give me a couple of days. I'll share it.
Okay, okay, okay,
Okay. Some dumps
okay,
I have been able to get hold of. So let me just go through it. Even I have not been able to go through because they give the dumps, but
okay,
like I don't know whether it is actually for the new one or the old one. So let me just go through. There are around 200 questions, I think. So I will share with respect to these topics whatever we have seen so far properly.
okay, okay,
Okay, just give me 3-4 days time.
okay, okay. Sure.
Okay, so we'll catch up next week.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thank you.